Hey everyone, greetings. It's Naomi Wolf of Outspoken on Substack and Daily Clout over on Daily Clout. And today on my podcast, Outspoken, I want to read you all an essay I wrote about the climate lockdown of a couple of days ago when it was snowing in New York, and why, in my view, that could have been a much more dangerous trial run for something much darker, given that New York City is now in the hands of an Islamist, Marxist, true red-green candidate. And we're seeing every day more and more what that means. Again, I love all people. I want to have every faith in all religions, but it's clearly evident more and more daily. There's Loki, who always likes to be in the podcast, that something very, very, very nefarious is coming at us. And I will say, out of respect for the many millions of wonderful Muslim people around the world, dressed cynically in the guise of Islam, radical Islam. So I'll read you that. And I also, before I begin, want to just express very briefly, I spoke about this a little last night on Brian's podcast, which is called Investigate Everything, Brian O'Shea, State of the Union. That was Tuesday night, the 24th of February, 2026. I've been around for a lot of State of the Union preparation. In the Clinton years, long ago, I was a White House spouse. My then husband was a speechwriter. So I had a very close-up look at the crafting of a State of the Union speech. And it is an undertaking, I will tell you, for any administration. Maybe the Clinton years were particularly crazy when it came to speech writing, because President Clinton famously liked to revise himself and put in tons of paragraphs that were very, very wonky right at the last minute or up until the last minute, redraft and redraft. It was a very both inspired and chaotic process, the State of the Union speech prep in those years. But the State of the Union is a very big deal. And it's a very beautiful deal. I don't know that other countries have something analogous. It's true democracy. The State of the Union, the name of it, comes from the president who works for us, the executive of our entity, is supposed to deliver to us, the employers, essentially the shareholders, the constituents, his summary or her summary of what is the state of our union. And so it's almost like an annual report in a corporation or a nonprofit. He's obligated, or she's obligated, to report to us the state of our union. And I think it's also quite beautiful, think about language as I do, that it's not called the state of the country or the state of the nation. It's the State of the Union. And just reminding us what a delicate and beautiful, unique system we have, in which these 50 states now are aligned in a union. The state and federal systems so delicately interplaying and balancing with each other. How is the state of our union? Our union has been tried. It nearly was severed from 1861 to 1865. And even now, I think we're seeing pressures from our adversaries to get in, to subvert, to invade, in order to break up our union, in order to fracture our union. A push for California to break off, or Texas to break off, or that the red states to separate from the blue states. Our union is a very precious, and I keep saying the word delicate. It is delicate. It's held together at a moment like the State of the Union speech in America. Americans and everyone in the rest of the world can really witness that we, unique among all nations, even nations that purport to be democracies, are governed with the consent of the governed. And yes, there's corruption. Yes, there's coercion. There's cheating. All of this came up, ironically, in the State of the Union speech last night. But it's a reminder that, unlike Starmer in Britain, who's just riding roughshod over the electorate, unlike the EU that doesn't even care what sovereign nations in Europe want, right? Unlike France, where they've just, made one of their biggest parties, made the head of that party, Marine Le Pen, unable to run for office, right? Tyranny is unfolding under the guise of bureaucracy and technocracy everywhere around us in advanced democracies that we thought were stable democracies. But America, to this moment, at the State of the Union, it's still, an accounting of our president and Congress, because that's also wrapped up what has Congress achieved, right? Often it's reported on in the State of the Union by the president, or referenced as President Trump did last night. But it's such a beautiful, moving manifestation of the fact that this guy works for us. We're still in charge, with all the fraying, all the pressure, all the subversion, all the damage from years of open borders. We still have a nation founded in liberty 250 years ago, nearly, and that guy still works for us. All of them, all the presidents still work for us. Yes, as Benjamin Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it. It's up to us to keep it. But I really feel blessed today, having watched the State of the Union speech last night, because I can't think of a nation, maybe India, in which the citizens are so visibly able to have a measurable impact on what happens at the highest levels of power. So it was a beautiful sight. And the other thing that was very clear from the State of the Union last night is how close we came to losing that forever in the United States. And I, as you know, I'm a lifelong Democrat until I, walked away in 2021 after my own administration turned on me and on the American people with COVID mandates and lockdowns and nonsense and tyrannical censorship and so on. But we were racing down a track in the Biden and, God forbid, Harris era that would have resulted in, if there had been a Kamala Harris presidency right now, I don't even know if there would have been a State of the Union, right? Because those people were so unaccountable. We don't even know what nation or nations was signing the executive orders or directing policy during the Biden era. The whole fact that we had someone who was literally demented, right? Not to be mean, but in a state of dementia, sitting in office for years, and the media and his inner circle covered up for him unlawfully, I will say, Article 25, I believe, of the Constitution. You don't have the right to cover up if the executive is impaired. If you know it, right? If you work with him or her. But, in the face of that giant question mark of if he wasn't reasoning out what the policies were, who was? If he wasn't signing the executive orders or affixing his signature to bills that reached his desk, who was, right? It could have been China. It could have been Russia. It could have been, the UN, like Soros, like we literally don't know who was running the United States of America during the Biden era. And to me, again, as a former Democrat, it's very scary and spooky that all the Democrats I love, who are still liberal, who are all in, when this issue comes up, they just, like, their eyes glaze over, they can't hear it, they can't talk about it, they change the subject. They don't care or can't deal with the implications of the fact that there was a void at the center of our nation at the highest level during the Biden-Harris years, and no one knows to this day what was filling it, right? They're taking no responsibility. It's behind us. It doesn't bear discussion. Super spooky and scary. But last night we were looking at it's almost like two timelines, right? I was so aware that it could have been that terrifying. We'd all be in quarantine camps under a President Harris timeline. We narrowly averted it, I think with God's grace, honestly, because nothing else makes sense. And now we're on a timeline in which you could feel the original energy of the founding generation, that original mission, right? Because like any organization or entity, we were founded with a mission of manifesting liberty and being a city on a hill. That descended intact. It almost died out, but President Trump, that excellent administration, in many ways, superb people at the top, running many agencies, visibly on display last night. Some not so great, but some stellar people. They blew on the embers of that dying mission, and the electorate. We didn't sit around. I mean, I'm looking at Britain. I'm sorry, Britain. I know I have a lot of people watching from the United Kingdom. Sorry, I have to be honest. The noble country, invented freedom of speech, invented trial by jury, right? Legendary culture, literature, extraordinary peace and prosperity, once the greatest power on earth. That noble nation, Great Britain, they are literally like sleepwalking or sitting on their hands. Sorry, everyone. As their country is being visibly, systematically taken from them through a clear policy of elevating far, fanatical Islamists, giving them impunity from law, unleashing sexual assault via radical Islamists onto native-born British women and girls, right? Which is a weapon of war. Like, let's not forget that has always been a weapon of war, to rape the other tribe's women. It's a way to break a people, and war has always known that, right? That's why there's so much rape in war. But the assigning housing and benefits and food and education and to these illegal immigrants who are clearly a mercenary army, right? Fighting age men, being shipped in boats, like clearly battalions, right? Landing on the shores of the United Kingdom, bringing horrible programs to school children that, they try on niqab, they try on hijab, they go to the mosque, they eat halal food. And meanwhile, churches are being burned to the ground. Preachers are being arrested for preaching Christian texts or doctrine. People are being arrested for praying silently outside of abortion clinics. People are, having knocks on their door from the police for angry posts on social media, right? Or critical posts about transgender stuff or immigration. So that country's, the memo, I keep calling it memo on social media when you see these things, the very flamboyant public prayer, which doesn't happen in Muslim countries. Doesn't happen. It's a show of force, a show of dominance. It's happening here in New York now. Or the very flamboyant, sword fights, right? This is such a spectacle designed to terrorize, shock, and humiliate native Britons who are, peaceable generally in civil society, at least now. They didn't used to be. And this is all happening, and people on social media who are British are like, surely this is not allowed. They've literally forgotten how to run their own democracy. It's not really their fault. They were trained to forget over the last couple of decades. Certainly when they were part of the European Union, nations are trained to forget that they have sovereignty, that they get to pass the laws, they get to lobby, they get to know what the laws are. They're in charge. They can fire their leadership. They can, write laws. They forgot all of that. I mean, I'll never forget when I was living in Britain, while the debate over Brexit was unfolding, I would ask people at a local pub, do you know how to lobby your MP? And literally no one knew. Do you know how laws are passed in Britain? No one knew. Do you know how the EU, how to lobby the European Union? they didn't know because it's set up to be impossible. You can't lobby the European Union. You can't even know what laws are coming down the pike with the European Union. The people who decide the laws aren't even elected in the European Union. So all of that is happening and was designed to happen. But this noble people who have, fought 2 world wars and won them, who have a millennium and nearly 2 millennia of extraordinary achievements in an unbroken line and an intact monarchy and nearly intact aristocracy in terms of like tradition being intact. They literally are like paralyzed because they have no weapons. They can't access their laws. Parliament.uk is designed to be unsearchable, right? So it lies to people. It says, oh, your laws are rolled up in scrolls and you have to be a lawyer to access them. It's horrible lies. But they don't, they're not even curious, right? Because there are ways around that, like hiring your own lawyer, bringing a lawsuit, bringing multiple lawsuits, confronting your MP, on and on and on, looking at your local council elections, getting elected to your local council. All of these things that we're doing in the United States, the equivalents of, because we realized during COVID that if we didn't figure out how our democracy worked, we wouldn't have anything left. We'd be serfs. They're not even trying to do that in Britain. Now, maybe they'd be arrested if they tried. I doubt it. So it's very, very heartbreaking. And that's happening, across Europe. But Europeans have been conditioned, but are agreeing to be incurious about how to save their own democracies. And if you're listening in Europe and you're mad, good. Prove me wrong. Go run for something. Go figure out how your laws work. Go sue the EU. Go, support a movement to break off from the EU. Seriously, I'm tired of the passivity of the British and the Europeans. And I think you're starting to hear this from Secretary of State Marco Rubio very diplomatically in his speech at the Munich Security Conference a week or so ago, and less diplomatically at the end of last year, I believe, from Vice President Vance, when he basically said, you guys are losing free speech. Come on, get a grip, fight for your rights, fight for freedom as you fought again and again in the course of modern times. And all the way back, the fight for liberty in Britain goes back, 400 or 500 years. This is not a new set of goals, but for whatever reason, Britain is in a state of hypnosis and complacency. Same is true of much of Europe. All that being said, we are not in a state of complacency in the United States. And I hope that everyone watching last night saw there is, we are a light unto the nations again. It kind of feels really good. Like that's our job. And it's our job to model how you can reclaim your republic from the jaws of tyranny. So big picture, I think that's what President Trump did last night. There are things I loved about his speech, things that I thought were not so great. It was way too long. No one after the 19th century, no one can or should talk for 2 hours. No one has the focus to be able to do that in the modern period. And it's just very hard to listen to anything for 2 hours. He literally spoke for 2 hours straight. Maybe that was intentional to demonstrate that he's nearly an octogenarian, but he has the stamina to speak for 2 hours. Churchill used to give speeches of that length, for instance, in modern times. But apart from that, there are so many things I loved that President Trump did. He, legacy media says he created a simulacrum or synthesized empathy, words to that effect. But he really demonstrated wonderful storytelling with his staff, highlighting all of these very moving individual stories that so well demonstrated the impacts of his policies. For instance, the waitress who was bringing home $5,000 more a year because there were no taxes on tips and no taxes on her husband's overtime. Excellent, kind of making it concrete for ordinary people. I hate that phrase, but non-specialists, citizens, voters. I loved the way he talked about immigration, calling out illegal immigration, calling out with hard numbers, not making the mistake he's made in the past of saying they're all criminals, they're all rapists, right? But saying they're a shocking number, like 10,000 murderers. I mean, it was a shocking number of illegal immigrants. And then saying, of course, we'll always welcome legal immigrants who love our country and want to make it great. That was a good distinction. I loved how he highlighted the wonderful hockey team, which should be a nonpartisan thing. So moving that he called attention to programs to allow couples to have fertility treatments and had someone there who was going to benefit from that. So great that he had someone there who was going to benefit from a really radical, like very radical, I believe, executive order making it unlawful for BlackRock and Vanguard to scoop up residential housing, so that people have a chance of, bidding on a house and buying a house, again, the American dream. That was powerful. So many powerful moments. The little girl who was injured by an illegal alien, beautiful little girl who's kind of relearning everything because she was so badly injured. No one likes those tragic stories, but it was very hard by doing that again and again and again. He made it very hard for anyone to want to join the Democratic team. Like, what did they stand for? Boys and girls sports, millions of illegal immigrants crossing our borders that we don't know who they are. He really very masterfully took over all of the positive places, very nonpartisan, right? A lot of these policies he's advocating, like the Trump savings account, that's really not partisan. You want your kid to have $100,000 when they're 18. Everybody does. It's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democratic thing. To his credit, and I think this is partly because of the beauty and alchemy of Maha with many former Democrats or current independents and MAGA working together, people like Scott Bessent at Treasury, who I don't know if he's a Republican or a Democrat, or I don't know. He's very moderate, right? He's actually a classmate of mine, I believe, from Yale. But, people like Tulsi Gabbard, who used to be Democrats, right? There's input about policy that results in policies that are not, let's make sure no one can have an abortion, or, like, let's make sure there's no budget to run anything and no public transportation. Republicans can fall into those kinds of traps, just like Democrats can. Like, they're falling into their own trap. Like, all trans, all immigrant, that's a trap if I were advising the Democrats. But the policies that President Trump rolled out last night were overwhelmingly nonpartisan, common sense, peace and prosperity policies. And the brilliant thing he did was to say, stand up if you put America first over illegals. And I don't think any Democrats stood up. That was a moment that, if legacy media wasn't wholly owned by the same people who wholly own the Democrats, that moment would be a kind of where's the beef moment, or, tear down this wall moment, like one of the sound bites for the ages, for the history books. I doubt it'll be in the history books until someone else is writing the history books, but it was a fantastic rhetorical moment, and it worked. Democrats looked bad. They didn't stand up for the mother of the young, I believe, Ukrainian woman who was murdered randomly. Like, who wouldn't stand up for that? They looked graceless. They looked like sad visually. They were uninteresting. President Trump and the Republicans were, the women on the Republican side were wearing, this was clearly by design, deep red suits or burgundy suits. And a lot of the men had red ties and navy suits, right? It looked very, very coherent and colorful in a disciplined way. Whereas on the Democratic side, everyone just looked, the women wore white suits again. God knows why. I haven't even looked it up. Last time they did that, it was for abortion rights, which is kind of creepy because white is the color of death in a number of cultures. But I don't know why they're wearing their white suits now, but it was like white and, men in gray or navy suits. And so they looked very uninteresting visually. So there was a stark contrast between the Republican side where people were standing up and they looked healthy and they, looked colorful and they had energy and they were chanting USA, USA, but they were disciplined, and the quite depressing Democratic side. Along with it, I don't know if anyone noticed it, but there was a Democrat who had a sign that read, "Black people are not apes." I believe that was his sign. And who knows what that refers to, probably an ill-phrased tweet. And it was disturbing that he confronted people on the other side of the aisle before he was either ushered out or walked out, because this president has survived like 3 or 4 assassination attempts. And it just reinforced, it was a scary moment to me, right? Because of the chaos. It reinforced the, may I also say his head of HHS lost his dad to an assassination attempt, So, and his uncle. So it was a destabilizing moment. I kind of caught my breath in fear when that happened. And it just reinforced that, the Democrats right now don't look like the adults in the room. They look chaotic. They look violent. They look childish. They look like they don't know how to run a business. They don't know how to balance a budget. They're enthralled to all the wrong people. And they have all the wrong priorities. So masterful. There are things I didn't like as much, but we don't need to spend time on them. I do think it was kind of a home run. And it comes right after Marco Rubio's home run, again in Munich. So that's 2 home runs. And this is from a president who wasted, and I wrote an essay about this, when he was running for office, wasted a lot of his opportunities in speech contexts, just rambling and going into rabbit holes where he just said mean things that repelled people. Sorry, I'm being honest, repelled people like me, repelled moderates and liberals, and didn't do him any favors, but also made it very hard for the media to cover what he was saying. I've written about that. So he's cleaned that up. His speechwriters have cleaned that up. I hope they gave copies of the speech to all the press that were present or that were covering that speech, and bullet points. But it's very hard not to know what President Trump was talking about after the State of the Union. The bullet points were very clear. It wasn't, I missed soaring rhetoric, right? I missed narrative momentum. Great speeches have that. You have a sense that you're in a plane that's lifted off and it's going somewhere. It's going higher and higher. And then there's a climax and a diminuendo. And I could talk for hours about great speeches and rhetoric and the history of great speeches and rhetoric. And maybe I will another time. This speech didn't have that. But it had so much context and storytelling that I'm not going to quibble about that. You can't always have both. And it's better to have the accomplishments of this administration, which are considerable. In a single year, I think this administration's gotten done more than I've seen in my lifetime, in a first year of any administration. And if you have to choose between beautiful rhetoric and laying out for the record a series of important accomplishments like ending 8 wars, right? The Dow up to wherever, peace and prosperity, getting all the hostages back. I mean, these are huge accomplishments, right? Not a single illegal crossing the border. Huge. I think that his speechwriters and he made the right choices. If they ever want to soar, they know where to find me. I will happily do a top edit for soaring. But failing that, it was a 95 out of 100 speech. And you've just got to credit this administration for doing so much. these agencies are not sleeping. And honestly, I'm just going to wrap up by saying, and I can't believe I'm saying this because I was raised to hate Donald Trump and, fear Republicans. But I saw the hand of God all over those people in this moment. Not only has this man survived 3 or 4 assassination attempts and probably others we haven't heard about, and by the way, every time I see the First Lady of the United States, I give her so much credit because it must be terrifying to be anywhere in public, given the history of violence aimed at her husband, thus by extension at her and her family, but also just at her husband, who wants to witness their loved one getting attacked. It's you can't imagine how traumatic that must be. And this woman is so brave. I think she's the best First Lady we've had for a century, certainly, maybe since Abigail Adams. I'm such a fan of FLOTUS, and knowing what goes into being a First Lady or a Second Lady, from having worked around them, and in the case of the Gore team with the Second Lady at times, it's a big job, and there are many ways to make mistakes. And Melania Trump literally never makes mistakes. I have not seen her make a single mistake. And she also, I'm just going to say this, we're in a visual medium, she looks perfect. She always looks perfect. And that's a whole other job, and she just makes all of her choices very interesting. The First Lady, she wasn't born in America. She became a citizen much later in her life as an adult. She wasn't even born in a free society. I think she was born in a Soviet satellite country. And I think she really feels like some people really feel like Trump feels it. You can tell, especially now that his ego has been cleared away, subsequent to assassination attempt number 2. You can really feel that change in him. But he's always had that like channeling of the American spirit from the perspective of someone born to it, right? I feel like Melania Trump also has that channeling of the American spirit as an immigrant, the way that like my grandmother, who came from the United States via Odessa, channeled it, or my other grandma from Romania. Like, those immigrants loved this country because they knew what it stood in contrast to, what it provided a haven from. And, the Tsar's tyranny, which became Stalin's tyranny, which became Khrushchev's tyranny, and so on. So I feel that Melania Trump, when she's in public, she really manifests a kind of American aristocracy vibe, but it's a republic aristocracy. It's an aristocracy of the people. I feel she really understands her symbolic archetypal role as kind of the goddess figure of liberty, or the mother figure of liberty, with also with so much elegance. And she's really channeling. She's very visually talented, the way that Jackie Kennedy was very visually talented, using fashion and decor and iconography to communicate a message and create a sense of stateliness and upliftingness. And she channels like American queen vibes, right? She channels European aristocrat vibes, but filtered through an American populist lens. So I give her every kind of credit because we're registering that subliminally, even without her ever talking about it, or most commentators even ever noticing it. If you wonder about that, contrast the way she dresses and presents herself with Mrs. Biden, who, whatever, Long Island Mall, whatever. I'm not trying to be mean. It's just some people channel the higher calling of being First Lady and other people don't. And Mrs. Clinton, who just communicated with all of her choices that she had nothing but disdain for the role of First Lady. And we felt it, we felt her disdain manifesting through her clothing choices and her affect. And I'm going to take one observation before I go to my essay. Taze Seen, who is full of a lot of criticism and a Palestinian watermelon symbol, says Melania Trump is a paid call girl from the Epstein files, so shut up. You know more than I, but how disgusting to assume that if someone has a past, they can't be worthy of a future. That's just so sexist and disgusting. And let's move on to, so that's what I want to say about the State of the Union. I think it's very exciting. I don't know if it's going to save the midterms, but I do think that if the SAVE Act passes, which will ensure that people have to show that they're citizens before they register to vote, that could save the midterms, because it is also starting to feel really, really, really weird that Democrats do not want anyone to show that they're citizens before they have registered to vote. It just exposes them so much. And we at Daily Clout have had an experience along these lines because we have a wonderful election integrity bill. And when our friends in state legislatures, like in Maine, tried to pass it, it was Republicans who wanted to pass it, and Democrats who the minute they found out that it did away with absentee ballots, sat on it, made it die in committee. So I think that we're in a time where the veils are dropping away. All right, now I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to read my latest essay titled, "Yes, It Is Snowing in New York." The subtitle is, a, quote, blizzard gives Marxist-Islamist Mayor Zoran Mamdani pretext for a, quote, climate lockdown. I wrote this about 2 days ago. It's snowing. Outside the big picture windows of the flat where we stay when we come to Brooklyn, a gentle snow falls. It gusts in the bare tree branches that reach up to the gray-yellow sky. The trees shake back and forth in the wind. The snow-laden branches stand between us and what are the usually chaotic backyards of the row of dilapidated late 19th century townhouses across from us. The backyards and their everyday detritus have receded under the snowfall to reconfigure into a vague elegance. Plastic chairs and rotting wooden picnic tables have been buried under a thick blanket of white. There is about 1.5 feet of snow resting across the roofs of the townhouses, gentling their outdated television antennas and their crooked skylights. Everything looks like frosting on a wedding cake. Everything looks like an old-fashioned Christmas card, the kind, are you my age or older, that they used to have in the mid-1960s that had silver glitter glued to the white snow that came off a bit in your fingers. The snow layering the roofs and balconies and railings makes Brooklyn look like the archetypal German or Swiss village on Christmas cards, nestled in wintry softness as seen far below Santa's descending sleigh. This blizzard, or blizzard, it seems to me better described as a snowfall, has been heralded by legacy media now for a couple of days. The language about it has been histrionic. It is a bomb cyclone, and these are all linked, of course. It is severe weather that requires an alert. A red rectangle on the weather sites surrounds those scary words. And there you can see screenshot, New York City remains under state of emergency, Mamdani says. You can't travel. But it's not just that you are being advised not to travel as a sovereign person, as in the past. There are travel bans. CNN warns blizzard travel bans remain in effect as 5 states have over 2 feet of snow. The headline's freakout conceals the fact that this snowfall is within the range of normal for the northeastern United States. While CNN has found that this is the biggest snowfall on record for one city, Providence, Rhode Island, You have to click through several links and read carefully to find out that the last time it snowed this much in New York City was 5 years ago. And this storm has dropped the most snow in New York City since that one in 2021. The New York Post headline calls this storm's snowfall historic, though the fine print shows that the last such storm was in 2016. Same with Philadelphia. This is Philadelphia's snowiest winter since 2018. So basically, if you read carefully and critically, you realize that the snow is falling well within, again, the range of what is normal for winter in the Northeast. In 1947, the snow measured over 26 inches in Central Park, and you can see an image of very deep snow in a New York City street in 1947. Today in JFK Airport, in contrast, the snow is about 15 inches deep. In 1888, 21 inches of snow fell in about 24 hours. Eventually, snow in that snowstorm accumulated to snowbanks almost 5 feet high. And there you have an image of a New York City street with 5-foot-high snowbanks. Here's piles of snow in what looks like Chinatown or some sort of lower Manhattan street, and more piles of snow that could actually be 6th Avenue. Hard to say. In spite of the fact that receiving up to 2 feet of snow in winter, New York City is entirely normal, the headlines drumming up hysteria have prepared the way for what is unfolding right now via City Hall and via our still new on the job Marxist-Islamist Mayor Zoran K. Mamdani. A pure Marxist-Islamist takeover, a trial run. In a press conference on Sunday, February 22nd, 2026, Mayor Mamdani showed a range of somber city administrators arrayed behind him, all of them wearing sad faces and holding their hands clasped in front of them. I note the flimsy branded sweatshirts and windbreakers, both zipped and unzipped, and the almost theatrically glum faces of Mamdani's crisis team. I feel that this entire iconography is part of the theater of humiliation to which Mamdani is deliberately subjecting our city, just as the Biden era's women's luggage stealing advisors, its obese health commissioners, its staffers with their publicly broadcast fetishes involving dog masks and leashes, and its pics of sex somehow managed in congressional hearing rooms. You need security clearance just to get into those spaces. We're all part of a staged theater of humiliation aimed at our country as a whole that was similarly designed and produced by our enemies at that time for similar reasons, to reduce and degrade us. I just want to make sure I am still, yes, I am still, I'm still sharing. To reduce and degrade us. As a reader of political iconography, I can tell you that this image of Mayor Mamdani's press conference in front of a random digital ad in the background for Spotify with the stars and stripes not clearly visible at all. I'm going to try to actually share this so you can see what I'm talking about. No, let's do it. There we go. There's the image with not clearly visible at all, with one staffer holding her cell phone as if she can't be bothered to put it away, with staffers wearing what look like sweatpants or last year's Target jeans and work boots, with a woman in the front row who no doubt works at a computer, having mysteriously rolled up her pants cuffs to a depth of at least 2 inches, and the woman to her right, who also probably works at a computer station, having tucked her pants cuffs into her boots, as if these women and men are the proletariat who have been slogging through the snowy, treacherous marshes of the hinterlands of lower Manhattan to get their jobs done, instead of having arrived neatly by subway or Uber with the long-haired male sign language translator having failed either to brush or comb his disheveled tresses. In all of it, and it is all carefully thought out, this image says, here are the sad, weak people, but workers see their trouser cuffs who are now in charge of the safety and security of America's greatest city. And you should be able to see this image. It's quite an extraordinary image. I'm enlarging it. See, I don't know who these people are, but this woman has, they're wearing work boots and they're rolling up their boots to, literally as if they've just brought in the horses from a snowy stable to keep the city running. And it's a very Marxist image. And these people look incredibly sad. They don't look competent. They don't look resolved. They look beaten and depressed and weak, and their stance is weak. And they also look, I'm sorry, but we're in a visual medium, extremely poorly groomed. And these things are not trivial. I was an advisor on imagery as well as language and messaging to 2 presidential campaigns. These little things really register, all these wrinkles. Just look at I don't mean wrinkles in faces, I mean wrinkles in clothing. I want you to look at how these people handle their trouser cuffs. All right, we're going to get back to that. But if you can't make your clothes fit, can you run the greatest city on earth? If you can't find a tailor, can you run one of the biggest economies on earth? You'll see why I bring this up in just a minute. It is a messaging of pure, bleak, defeated Marxism. Men, women, it doesn't matter. Professionals, laborers, no matter. The team has all been leveled down to the gray and blue universal misery of comradeship and communist communitarianism. And all are messaging to New York and to the world an equal haplessness in protecting the city, allegedly now at grave risk that they are tasked to oversee. Contrast that to the very different iconography and messaging of the Trump administration, with its advisors standing in nearly identical positions. And I have, enlarged this image. I trust that you can see it. There's Ronald Reagan right behind them. President Trump has heightened here the contrast and colorfulness of what had been, as I recall, quite monochromatic yellow curtains in the Oval Office. He's heightened, and purists might be apoplectic about this, but it's doing what he wanted it to do. You see these this gold gilt filigree, right? Not historically accurate, but it foregrounds the messaging that this is an historic space, this is an elegant space, this is a traditional space. I would say it amplifies it too much, but it's his intention to communicate power and majesty, really. And you see all of the guilt behind them here, the guilt in the books were probably chosen not for the content, but for the gilding on their bindings. You see the gold vase here. You see the gilt in the half moon Georgian decoration there. It's all very carefully communicated. You see it picks up the gold surrounding the symbol, which he's made bigger, I believe, than it had been in the past. I think he's changed the podium. It used to be much blockier. Now it's narrower and more elegant. You can see people's bodies behind it. And he's arranged his team in exactly the same physical position as this team, but the contrast could not be more stark. Everyone is wearing suits of the exact same, all these 4, and I think Vance as well, maybe the guy behind Vance, all the same shade of bright navy, right? Not a normal navy shade. It's much more telegenic. A little loud for daily life, but he understands television and video. Things that look loud or vulgar, on the street actually work much better and look normal and attractive on camera. So they're all, they're all in a uniform basically, but it's an elegant uniform that's well tailored. And then he's got some gray. This guy's in gray. This guy's in gray. Of course, this is a woman, and she's in a bright red, Republican red, very well tailored, well fitting dress. Okay, it's not slutty, it's not showy. I don't like to use words like slutty. I don't like to body shame, but women are under scrutiny when they're in the public eye. It's a modest dress, but it's very well fitting. It's, she's not like hiding the fact that she's a woman, as opposed to these ladies. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but this is such a monogender look, right? Whatever the sexuality, and I don't even care, whatever the identity, I don't care of these people. This message is, gender doesn't matter. Professional status doesn't matter. None of it matters. We're all proletarians. And Mao did that. The Mao jacket, men, women were, had to cut their hair under communists. Their gender differentiation was frowned upon. This messaging is, we're men, we're women, we're leaders, we're Americans, in this case, we're professionals. And the other thing I really want you to notice is the trouser cuffs. Okay. Every single one of these people, even the guy wearing what looked like more casual pants in the back, every one of these guys has gone to a tailor and had his pants cuffs properly hemmed so that they are not bagging all over his shoes. And like these people who have random pants cuffs of all lengths, but mostly too long, which just make them look sloppy and unprepared. All right. And these things are not little. We don't consciously think, well, I'm definitely going to vote for, President Trump's team because they know how to hem their trouser cuffs. But subliminally, if you're an employer and you have two equally talented people coming in for a job interview, the one who looks like a slob, or who looks like he or she doesn't care about him or herself, doesn't care about being a face of the country, a face of the administration, municipal or federal, you would choose the one who is a good advertisement for what you're doing. And that includes, making sure your pants fit. If you were an adversary of America's, which team would you rather fight? In this sadness and weakness broadcasting theater of humiliation press conference, Mayor Mamdani warned the press corps that the snow was falling and that therefore we were all in dire danger. Mamdani has been stung by criticism of how he had managed, or rather mismanaged the fallout from the January 2026 snowstorm, with its unprecedented mountains of urine-soaked and feces-spotted old snow frozen over, presenting barriers to the disabled, to children and the elderly, as well as to sanitation workers and emergency services for a matter of weeks, with its caverns of uncollected trash that attracted rats and fattened them to the size of baby woodchucks. Due to Mayor Mamdani's right-on policy of not bringing homeless people into warm shelter, 19 homeless New Yorkers at that time froze to death. Mamdani had, in less than a month in office, turned New York into a Dickensian cesspit, with New Yorkers dying Dickensian deaths from exposure, and with New Yorkers facing, to their horror, Dickensian levels of energized vermin, as well as sanitary dangers from standing waste that we thought had been sorted out forever by the early 20th century. So Mayor Mamdani, understandably, wished this time to get ahead of that kind of criticism. But in seeking to do so, he rolled out a management vision of New York in a crisis that escalated the rights restrictions of the bad old days of COVID lockdowns with their violations of the Constitution. And he took them even further into a Marxist nihilist hellscape in the name of what is really a climate lockdown. First of all, Mayor Mamdani explained that there was a travel ban and that roads were closed to ordinary people. It was forbidden for private citizens to drive their private cars on the city roads. Here is Mayor Mamdani's announcement of his declaration of a state of emergency. Quote, Additionally, temperatures dropping into the 20s overnight will result in slippery streets, sidewalks, and extremely hazardous conditions across our city. Due to these factors, and this is my italics, we are declaring a state of emergency and instituting a travel ban starting at 9 p.m. this evening and ending at 12 p.m. tomorrow. That's the end of the italics. This state of emergency closes the streets, highways, and bridges of New York City for all traffic, cars, trucks, scooters, and e-bikes, with some specific exemptions for essential and emergency movement. I will show you in a minute how that is a gigantic fib, a total lie. We are asking New Yorkers to avoid all non-essential travel. Note, this is my note, in his press conference, the mayor misleadingly concealed the fact that the travel ban covers private cars, but does not cover a range of the vehicles of his friends, donors, and allies. See below. End brackets. Now, this is Mamdani again. Please, for your safety, stay home, stay inside. Have you heard that before? And stay off the roads. Hazardous conditions put delivery workers, drivers, and restaurant staff at risk. If you can do so, please look out for your fellow New Yorkers and prepare meals at home until the weather improves. Italics mine. To aid New Yorkers with disabilities throughout this period, 4-foot wide paths must be cleared across all sidewalks to accommodate wheelchairs and other mobility devices. This is an existing mandate. Listen to the language, mandate. I've deconstructed that word mandate, which has no force of law. A mandate is just someone telling someone to do something. It's not a law. It doesn't, exist as a law. But we're back to mandates, an existing mandate. Italics mine, property owners will receive summonses if they do not do this labor. The Bolsheviks also had the bourgeoisie shoveling snow in 1918. And here you have an image of Bolsheviks forcing, quote, former people, aristocrats, to clean the streets covered by snow in St. Petersburg in 1918. Later, they were murdered on the spot or were sent to camps in the Soviet Gulag. And the photos are from Count Pavel Sergeyevich Sheremetev, a future victim from the Russian state archives. It's a very poignant image of what looks like an older lady aristocrat or bourgeoisie forced to shovel snow before being murdered or sent to a camp in 1918. Quote, property owners, it is your responsibility. In the last issued the New York Department of Sanitation issued more than 4,000 violations. I want to be clear, our interest is not in issuing violations. It is in finding compliance. And finally, I want to warn New Yorkers, the snow will be especially wet and heavy and will be more strenuous to clear. So he's saying, you've got to clear it. It's not your job in the past to clear it out of the places we're asking you to clear it. But if you don't do it, you're going to get what he calls a violation. It's actually a summons or a fine. And also it's dangerously heavy and wet, but you have to do it anyway. Okay. It's so Marxist, right? It's so like Stalinist, this language. The acting commissioner of the Department of Sanitation added, quote, I want to be clear to all New Yorkers. Clearing snow and ice from the sidewalk is the responsibility of the adjacent property owner. Property owners must maintain a 4-foot path to allow a stroller or wheelchair to pass. And if the property sidewalks include an unsheltered bus stop or curb ramp, property owners are required to clear this as well. And the italics here are mine. And this is me saying this is a completely new requirement for property owners, no matter if they are female, elderly, or disabled, to be forced to clear snow from city bus stops and from curb ramps, which are the gigantic ramps that go down into intersections. So it's very hazardous to clear these because people are streaming over them at all times into traffic, right? And you have to be in traffic in order to clear them. I mean, it's such a dangerous thing to do. And if you don't do it, you face violations, meaning fines. We pay taxes for this labor to be done by unionized members of the city's workforce. Is this demand yet another attack on property owners? And that's my bracket. picking up again with DSNY, quote, make no mistake, we will be issuing summons after the storm. They have a problem with singular plural agreement. A summons is singular. He means summonses after the storm for property owners who do not meet this responsibility to keep their neighbors safe. Italics mine. Just listen to that language. There's not a law. They can't say it's New York City law that you have to clear out the bus shelters, meaning 30 feet of deep snow, in front of the bus shelter as well, where the buses pull up. You have to clear off the ramp, the curb ramp, as I mentioned, goes right into the traffic. They can't point to a municipal law that says that, because there is no municipal law that says that. It's a whole new thing. And so all the millions of dollars we spend on Department of Sanitation to do that job has just been erased. And Mamdani is creating a labor force, really, out a compulsory, unlawful labor force out of New York City property owners, in particular, the bourgeoisie, the people he's already targeted with other overt, laws and messaging. But they can't say there's a municipal regulation. So what he says is, we will be issuing summons after the storm for property owners who do not meet this responsibility. What is that, right? It has no force of law. It's a social, virtue signal word, this responsibility to keep their neighbors safe. So they've just laid over us the same kind of Marxist redefinition of the individual in relation to the collective that a lot of COVID mandates also used, with like, oh, don't jeopardize grandma. You can't possibly go into a public place in spite of the First Amendment, freedom to assemble, because you might not keep your neighbors safe, right? Public health. So that is as I've written in The Bodies of Others, a completely different definition of what we're doing in a civil society. It superimposes the collective, your responsibility to keep your neighbors safe, right? There is no such nowhere. Like, there are regulations that say, if my smoke alarm goes off, I have to put out the smoke. I'm sure that is there. Or you can't just dump whatever you want on the street because of public health ordinances to not put human waste on the street or whatever. There are those regulations and laws, but there isn't a generalized responsibility by law to keep my neighbor safe, as opposed to what I choose to do lawfully with my own individual property, my own individual body and movement. This upends all of that, just like COVID did, and says, oh, no, get out there in your wheelchair, 65-year-old lady property owner, and shovel that snow, because it's your responsibility to keep your neighbors safe. They just invoke that out of thin air, but it is a Marxist collectivist invocation, all right? Now, the travel ban ended at noon on Monday. This is me writing again. Has there ever been a travel ban in New York City before? How can you have a travel ban? The First Amendment guarantees Americans freedom of assembly, which freedom covers freedom of movement. But if you issue a state of emergency, it means that civil law is suspended and you can impose unconstitutional restrictions. This is what I have been warning about. This is why I've been warning about emergency law since my book, The End of America, in 2007. When was New York City's last unconstitutional travel ban? That's right. You guys want to guess? It was in 2020, at the start of the state of emergency declared by then Governor Andrew Cuomo because of COVID. It is worth your seeing Mayor Mamdani's Executive Order number 3 in full. It is a terrifying document. And by the way, it was scrubbed off of some servers when I was looking for it. Quote, winter weather emergency declaration, big capital letters. Whereas the public safety is imperiled by a severe snowstorm that is expected to interrupt the flow of traffic, restrict the operation of emergency vehicles, and impede the delivery of essential goods and services. And whereas it is necessary to restrict vehicular traffic as provided herein in order to protect life and property and to allow for rapid and effective snow removal, Now, therefore, pursuant to the powers vested in me as mayor of the city of New York, I hereby declare a state of emergency. Section 1, except as otherwise provided in Section 2 of this emergency executive order, for the duration of the local state of emergency, the streets, highways, bridges, and tunnels in the city of New York are closed for vehicular traffic, including but not limited to commercial trucks, electric bicycles, scooters, and mopeds, effective 9 p.m. Sunday, 22nd till 12 p.m. Monday, the 23rd, 2026. The following vehicles may operate. Now, this is what he did not tell the city or the press in his press conference. He left Section 2, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I out of his disclosure. All right, what is allowed? Not your car, not your mom's car, not the car of disabled people who are trying to get to work or get to the library or have a medical emergency. No. The following vehicles may operate on city streets, highways, bridges, and tunnels while the local state of emergency remains in effect. A, Metropolitan Transportation Authority, buses, access ride vehicles, and other vehicles, very vague, used for the purposes of responding to this emergency or other urgent needs by, the grammar is very dodgy here, any federal, state, or local government agency or any contractor of such agency. So if, Jessica Tisch, the police commissioner, wants a burrito, that is an urgent need. And if any of her contractors or any NGO that has a contract with any federal, state, or local agency also wants a burrito, that's an urgent need, as this is written. And you can tell from the grammar, it's not urgent needs of, it's urgent needs by. And they lump together the contractors, meaning the NGOs, and I'll get to the NGOs. B, vehicles used by any private agency, organization, or group organized and functioning for the purpose of providing fire, medical, ambulance, rescue, okay, that's narrow, housing, food, or other services directed toward relieving human suffering, so vague, injury or loss of life, or damage to property as a result of an emergency, including nonprofit and governmentally supported organizations. The NGOs delivering that burrito get to use the streets. Any other services directed toward relieving human suffering. That is so vague. Like, I want my burrito now. I'm suffering if I don't get my burrito immediately. I'm an NGO. You gotta, send Uber with my burrito. Vehicles used to deliver food, medical supplies, or fuel. Italics mine, of course, I put the italics on deliver food. So hello, DoorDash and Uber Eats, okay? Giant gift to DoorDash and Uber Eats. Vehicles used by utility companies to perform emergency repairs, fine. Vehicles used to transport persons to and from their places of employment in federal, state, or local government offices. So here we have the separation of, just like in the horrible first months of the pandemic, essential and non-essential workers. They've created a two-tier caste. Some can't travel, some can, the ones who can. If you are a government worker, if you work for the state, remember in Marxist utopia, the state is all powerful. And my italics are hello Uber. Medical facilities, pharmacies, grocery stores, including all food and beverage stores, convenience stores, gas stations, laundromats, news media, food, beverage, and hospitality establishments, hotels, and other places of accommodation, and hardware stores. What is that even? Now you're closing down so many businesses, like my little dry cleaner on the store, they're not allowed to drive to work. But if the laundromat employees can drive to work, the news media employees can drive to work, food, beverage, and hospitality, they can all drive to work. You're not allowed to go to your job, but the hotel industry gets to have their employees go to their job. And hardware stores, why hardware stores? God knows, right? So people can buy snow shovels, who knows? It's a two-tier economy yet again. Vehicles used to transport persons to hospitals or other medical facilities for medical care. Okay, fine. Vehicles used to transport persons to federal, state, or local court facilities for legal proceedings. Okay, fine. Any other vehicles, including for-hire vehicles used to transport persons employed to perform any of the services described in this section to and from their places of employment. So, and other vehicles authorized by the city. So in subsection H, Mamdani has basically said by emergency law, you can't drive your private car. Uber and Lyft are free to drive anyone around with this broad definition. And to all the profit that was locked up by you driving your own car and having your own parking space and your own gas and not being tracked, that's gone. And all that profit shifts over to Uber and Lyft and random taxis. In accordance with Executive Law Number 24, any person who knowingly violates the provisions of this order shall be guilty of a Class B misdemeanor. So if you drive your private car, which can't be tracked, to your private destination, you're breaking the law. This emergency executive order shall take effect immediately and shall remain in effect for 5 days, except as otherwise limited herein and unless extended or sooner revoked. Period, end quote. 5 days. So this is me again. If you read that carefully, it means you are violating the emergency law, committing a misdemeanor. If you get in your private car and try to drive anywhere in the city of Manhattan or the 5 boroughs, getting into an Uber and going to work for Zoran Mamdani is fine. Driving your Uber to drop off a burrito is fine, as I said above. Being an NGO employee and doing almost anything in your vehicle is also fine. The roads for which your taxes paid otherwise are, during this 5 days, covered by this edict, no longer accessible to you in your vehicle lawfully in any way. However, the people who can drive on your roads, emergency services and sanitation, that makes sense, but also any nonprofit that the mayor says is carrying out a humanitarian mission. Recall that a layer of unaccountable nonprofits, as felon CFO turned whistleblower Sam Antar has conclusively shown, operates in New York to effectively launder billions of dollars received from the municipal government to then give donors tax deductions and to then unlawfully get out the vote and lobby for Democratic and now Socialist Democratic, meaning communist candidates, to then get them elected and to then receive in turn the billions of dollars bequeathed to them by those elected officials. It's a complete circle. So those NGOs get to use the roads. See who else gets access to your roads? Food delivery drivers, DoorDash and Uber Eats, who contribute mightily to left-wing candidates in New York City. Note how in his press conference, Mayor Mamdani warned everyone not to eat in restaurants. Why not walk downstairs to a restaurant and keep small businesses profitable? No, this press conference and its restrictions present, like the COVID lockdowns, whose huge revenues I tracked in my book, The Bodies of Others, another windfall for DoorDash and Uber. DoorDash contributed $2.8 million to its candidates in the last election cycle. Uber contributed $250,000 to 2 frontrunners for city council speaker and $3 million to Governor Hochul. Now, even more importantly, consider the national security implications of this climate lockdown, which to me feels like a test run for something that will come in the future. The bridges and tunnels of Manhattan were closed. That means those on that island would be trapped if there were a true emergency. I was in New York right after 9/11, and my family lived through that horrific day. You could not, on the island of Manhattan, at least not in our neighborhood at that time, which was a mile from ground zero, escape unless you sought out a bridge or a tunnel from what turned out to be toxic, carcinogenic fumes and stench, not just from pulverized bodies, but also from tons of poisonous chemicals. The death rates and illness rates from cancer sustained by 9/11's brave first responders are catastrophic. Now imagine what would happen to 8 million people if there were a chemical attack and they could not leave at all. The whole island in 2001 was vulnerable to a second attack, which is a technique that terrorists often use. One blast to draw first responders and attention, and then the next blast to kill off those who respond. I remember the feeling of panic that I had, worrying that I might not be able to get my then small children off the island if I needed to. A few months after 9/11, I took all the money I had to make a down payment on a little house upstate, just so I would have somewhere safe to take my family if there were another attack on New York City. But to get out of the city, anyone requires freedom of movement and needs to get through a bridge or a tunnel. Mamdani's mandate unconstitutionally restricting travel removes that freedom and that access. The benign-sounding travel ban of February 21st to 22nd, 2026, with its allied NGOs free to patrol the streets and to determine access to others, placed New York City and its boroughs and all of its population squarely, helplessly into the crosshairs of any serious adversary planning an attack, an explosive, a dirty bomb or chemical attack, and a nuclear strike. This is no far-fetched worry. Mayor Mamdani's administration is studded with staffers who have expressed their contempt for America or for Jews who make up 12 to 13% of New York's population. Zohran Mamdani's own mother expressed her contempt for America and boasted that her son was not an American at all. Ramzi Qassem, now Mamdani's chief counsel, represented al-Qaeda. Middle East Forum reports that many of Mamdani's donors are linked to terror organizations. Quote, Mamdani's money trail, terror-linked donors bankroll NYC mayor's race. Some of America's most controversial extremist organizations are backing Mamdani, starting with the Islamic Circle of North America, a Muslim nonprofit that terror experts identify as the North American branch of Jamaat-e-Islami, a violent South Asian Islamist group. Ashrafuzaman Khan, the former head of ICNA's New York chapter, was convicted by a Bangladeshi war crimes tribunal and sentenced to death in absentia for his role in the torture and murder of 18 Bangladeshi intellectuals. 5 ICNA staff members kicked in a total of $1,300 in individual contributions to Mamdani, meaning that including matching funds, his campaign received $7,700 thanks to ICNA generosity. The Hamas-aligned Council on American Islamic Relations boosted a Mamdani-affiliated political action committee with a $100,000 donation, the Post has reported. On top of that, at least 5 CAIR officials gave independent small dollar gifts to the Democratic Socialists campaign, helping him scoop up taxpayer funds. They worked for an organization that was listed as an unindicted conspirator in a scheme to finance Hamas, a trial that ended in a 65-year sentence for a CAIR board member. Other Islamists from outside New York City have contributed to Mamdani's campaign through his super PAC, New Yorkers for Lower Costs. The Illinois Muslim Public Action Committee, which gave $10,500 to the PAC, includes as members Usama Jamal and Zahir Sahlul. Altogether, New York academics at hard-left institutions contributed over $105,000 to Mamdani, or up to $690,000 when boosted by matching funds. Both have served as presidents of the Mosque Foundation, a suburban Chicago organization with links to Hamas that has funded at least 4 charities that were subsequently shut down for financing terrorism. Mamdani, who has refused to condemn calls for violence against Israel and who used this week's October 7th anniversary to again accuse it of genocide, also enjoys financing from professional activists who work to demonize the Jewish state, end quote. So friends, the snow has ceased falling since I began to write. It's about 16 inches deep. I'll put on galoshes and go out in it, and likely I'll be just fine. But I won't be fine if this climate lockdown was a test run. We won't be fine here in New York and its boroughs if NGOs and donors are assigned rights to city resources, such as the streets themselves that are closed to ordinary citizens. That was how the Bolsheviks managed urban life, with friends of the party, with apparatchiks patrolling everyone else and gaining primary access to the common goods, and with ordinary people treated like serfs and subjects rather than as citizens. We won't be fine here in New York and its boroughs if our rights are restricted again, so that we are absolutely physically helpless against any attack that may come, perhaps from the many terrorist friends and allies of the mayor or the many terror-linked donors who put this mayor into office. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not a weather emergency. It was a snowstorm, but it may well have been, under the cover of climate and weather concerns, a very, very serious constitutional rights and national security emergency. That is my essay. So thank you for listening. Ace Rothstein says, you're hitting on all the key points. Good job. Thank you. Frankie Zen says, they really doing this, huh? Yes, they really are. Let's see. Sandy Hardy says, there's a scripture that says that in heaven, God has storehouses of snow and that he uses it for his purposes. The snowstorm is revealing who Mamdani is. That's very interesting. I'm not aware of that scripture because I wasn't aware there was snow in the Middle East, but not often. I know it snows from time to time in Jerusalem, probably in other areas in the Middle East as well. This is very insulting. AIPAC has got you. Hasbara is hasbarim. You know, hasbaring. Hasbara is Hebrew for, it means explanation, and its usage is propaganda. No, I don't have any ties to Israel or to Israel's outreach services. I'm an independent journalist, but I'm also Jewish. So yeah, I'm worried. I'm worried that this city where I live much of the time is being run by someone who is hiring people who say they want to get rid of us and harass or get rid of us, who target Jews as well as Israel and who have blocked entrance to synagogues. It's very, very frightening. And there's a precedent in history, and I'm not ashamed of my heritage. So you don't have to be hired by Mossad to be a Jew in New York who's very worried about the funding of this mayor by Islamist terrorists. Like, that's crazy to not worry about, whoever you are. Let's see. Anyone else? Very well said, says Gregory Ross. Thank you so much. And thank you for who you are and what you do. Thank you so much. All right. And some Platinum also liked it. So lots of kind words, some trolly words or critical words. I guess the thing that makes me tired about trolly criticism is, there's no substance there. Like, if anything I've said is wrong, factually wrong, wrong in argument, bring the evidence, but don't just call me names or raise false imputations. That is not honorable. All right, you guys, we're coming to the end of our half hour. I hope you understand why I'm so worried about this. I think that this essay dovetails well with my discussion of the State of the Union, because, you really saw freedom versus tyranny. And we've been talking a lot recently about the Red-Green Alliance, the Marxist-Islamist alliance, which is taking hold, throughout the West. We thought it was China, but now they've changed channels, and whether China's funding it or not, it's Marxist-Islamists. But I also interviewed Jamie Glazov yesterday, and he's got this very important book, United in Hate: The Left's Romance with Tyranny, Terror, and Hamas. And he explains in very great detail the historic background of the current resurgence of Marxism in the West. And he explains how it became entangled and how the left became entangled with radical Islam, which seems, like the opposite end of the spectrum from left-wing Marxism. Left-wing Marxism is atheistic and hates God and religion and fundamentalist Islam wants a theocracy, wants a Muslim caliphate. Radical Islam has violent laws against same-sex relationships. Marxists hate the family, the nuclear family, the heterosexual family, and have no problem with same-sex relationships, and in fact are boosting the erasure of gender altogether. Seemingly nothing in common, but what they do have in common is hatred of the individual, hatred of individual conscience, individual rights, and by extension, hatred of the West, which is where the culture of individual rights, as opposed to my responsibility toward my neighbor's safety, right? Obviously I'm responsible to not endanger my neighbor, but the whole idea that my freedom to wander around can be subordinated at any time to the collective, that idea is a Marxist idea, but it's also an idea that comes, it's very comfortable, very aligned with radical Islam, which has a notion of the which is the same root in Hebrew, which means the people, the Islamic people, the Islamic people that transcend national boundaries, and to whom you owe your primary allegiance. It's funny, people worry about Jews not having a primary allegiance to, say, the United States, and instead having a primary allegiance to Israel or to Judaism in some weird way. But really, overtly, Islamists actually say the Ummah is more important than any national allegiance, any national identity. And being Muslim is more important than being American or English or Canadian or Australian. So, I'm not saying something that imams don't say and that commentaries don't say, and commentators don't say. They say it all the time. So I don't know why everyone's focused on Jews who are very happy to be American or Canadian or English. The real danger that there's a collective coming for you is coming from Islam. And I hope you know by now, I'm not happy that I've reached this conclusion. I love the essence of the religion of Islam. It's a beautiful religion in its essence. It shares the same essence as Judaism and Christianity. It really does. They're called the Abrahamic religions for a reason. And according to our scripture, Islam descends from, we're cousins, right? Jews and Muslims. Islam descends through Hagar and Ishmael, Abraham's son, and with his concubine. Well, we can argue about that if you like. Dawn Girl says, no, it's not. Historically it is, right? Historically, they share the same roots. And they if you read the Holy Quran, I'll keep saying this because I'm not ever going to engage in black and white thinking. Radical Islam is doing terrible things to the world right now, but there are many beautiful things in the Holy Quran. And at the time that Muhammad, was bringing the Holy Quran to desert tribes, it was an improvement over the polytheism and paganism and, animal worship and sun worship and moon worship of the tribal religions at that time. And no, I get what you were saying. Thank you very much. And again, if you cherry pick St. Paul or you cherry pick Leviticus, you can find awful things, like Paul doesn't want women to speak in church. And there are ambiguous passages in Paul that seem to say, like, don't even get married, don't have sex even within marriage. You could make a caricature out of Christianity based on those excerpts. Same with the Old Testament. There are passages that say, stone your daughter to death if she fornicates. You could cherry pick those passages, and people online are doing ridiculous things, cherry picking alleged sections mistranslated and taken out of context of the Talmud, which isn't even as central in our faith tradition as the Torah. You could do that to any religion. But what I'm saying is it's time for moderate Muslims to speak up, although it's scary to speak up, right? Because radical Islam is so punitive and dangerous to critics. But they really have to, because what's happening is that radical Islam is colonizing and seeking to colonize the West. And radical Islam has colonized many, many, many countries that used to be Christian, whether it's southern Lebanon or, Egypt or Turkey, chunks of Turkey, Iraq. They used to have huge, vibrant Christian populations and be multi-ethnic. Iran used to be a really multi-religious, open, tolerant society. And then radical Islamists got in charge, and they do the same thing in country after country after country. What they're doing in Afghanistan, right? Subordinating women, subjecting women, forbidding girls from getting educations, clitoridectomy, child brides, slavery, for women, savage punishment for gay people, theocracies in which there's no individual liberties, the absolute censorship, absolute control of the whole society. So that's what I'm scared of. And that's who's in charge. Whether he personally is a radical Islamist is unlikely. His mom's Mira Nair, a famous Indian filmmaker. By the way, where does Kwame come from? Is Kwame really his middle name? Kwame is an African, like Southern African name, as I understand it. Like, I just don't, none of him is Southern African. Did he, acquire that middle name for his application to Columbia, where he claimed to be Black or sort of Black? I don't know. Look into that, you guys. But the bottom line is, whether he personally is an Islamist, this is the gesture on his homepage, which is an Islamist gesture, right? Men who are radical Muslims do this instead of shaking women's hands because, women are unclean or taboo to touch if they're not, wives. I'm not judging very critically. Orthodox Jewish men do the same thing, but, this is a signal. The shalwar kameez he wore is a signal. The eating with his hands, which I can promise you he doesn't do at Columbia, or Bowdoin, or, wherever he was an intern for his mom, the filmmaker. That's a signal. It's all dog whistles, and it's dog whistles to radical Islam, and they're funding him, right? So for all of these reasons, remembering 9/11, he suspended our way out of the city. You may say, Naomi, you're being hysterical about a snowstorm. Well, I've always been right. I've been right. I told you for years that the people streaming into our country, into Western Europe, were soldiers. And now in Europe, they're saying, let's use them as soldiers. I told you, right? I keep telling you and telling you. I said, there's a civil war. I said, it's an invasion. I told you this in 2021, 2022, 2023. I said, don't take the injection, right? It's a depopulation tool, like whatever. I'm always right. I take no pleasure in it, or I'm 95% right. So I'm right to be worried about this. You should worry about it, and let's defend and protect our civil liberties. All right, I've come to the end of my time with you. I hope that you got a lot out of that. I want to say that we keep losing paying subscribers on Outspoken. I don't know why, because we keep gaining unpaying subscribers. Like, we're more and more and more. It's 116,000 free subscribers and less than 3,000 paid subscribers. So that's a 25% drop in a year. I know times are tough, and I know the immediate crisis of the injection and lockdowns, and the reason many of you followed me for this work is past. But I think, I know I'm still, giving you important independent analysis. I think beautifully written essays. I don't just throw things out there. I take a long time, old-fashioned journalist, old-fashioned nonfiction writer, to really craft these essays on Outspoken and to give you incredibly informative interviews and podcasts about current events. So it costs money and to do that. And so if you can possibly afford to become a paid subscriber over on Substack, I really ask you to do that, or else it'll be difficult for me and my team to keep producing this content the way we have, and making it so widely available that we reach some months almost 2 million views and viewers. If you think it's important to have this point of view all over the world, we're in like half a dozen to a dozen countries around the world in the top 100 or 200 podcasts for news commentary. If you think these perspectives are important in countries like Britain and Canada and Australia and Indonesia and Ghana and, you know, all of the places that we show up, Norway recently in the top lists of podcasts for news commentary, please support it, right? I really need your support. You get the media that you support. It's down to that. And if you don't want Mockingbird Media, you really need, if you can possibly afford to put some resources toward Daily Clout or toward Outspoken. You can go over to Daily Clout and make a one-time donation or become a paid subscriber. That really helps as well. Lastly, we have billcam.com and legisector.com, which are incredible tools that, again, cost between $500,000 and $750,000 to develop. But they put the power of Congress in your hand, right? Unlike what's happening in England, we solved this problem for the US. So you can just go to billcam.com and you can see top trending bills, any state or federal bill. You can share it through social media. You can stop it. You can change it. You can comment on it. You can contact the bill sponsor. We've had users have had so much success stopping bad bills, warning people about bad bills, and advancing good bills that no one had ever heard of, or learning about good bills in the top trending bill section or through search. So again, you know, it takes a developer a couple of $1,000s a month just to keep that running. I need your help. If you want to have these civic tools that keep us from turning into Britain or Canada, please support us so I can keep the doors open. And you can go to billcam.com and become a subscriber or just send Daily Clout a donation. And the same thing with Legisector. It's an amazing tool, only $11.99 a month. And you can follow bills by one of 27 subjects. So whatever your industry, whatever your concern, whether it's family law, cannabis, energy, infrastructure, environment, transportation, telecom, any one of 27 subjects, you'll see what's happening. You'll get a dedicated legislative portal. Again, it took a lot to develop this tool. It's exhausting, but no one else has a tool like it. And you can also invest much more knowledgeably than you could have before you had legisector.com. Please go over to legisector.com. You get a 30-day free trial. You can cancel if you don't like it, but you've got to try it. You've got to tell your friends about it. You can give it as a gift. It's an amazing tool, especially if you're in any way involved in any one of these professions or an advocacy group, or if you invest in the stock market. You need to know what's coming down the line. So that's all. Help us stay open. Help us keep bringing you these powerful tools. I designed them because I had been a political consultant, and I saw that citizens were left out of the process of drafting bills, and that millions or billions of dollars changed hands, and vast amounts of IP and incredibly important insider knowledge changed hands when people were sitting at that table. And usually it was lobbyists and special interests sitting at the table. So I created something so you can sit at the table. But I do need your help because it's a very low bar to entry, made it super affordable. But it means you have to subscribe in order for this to work. All right. Thank you all. I want to thank our sponsors, who are amazing as well. And again, without whom we couldn't function. Wall Street doesn't want you paying attention to this, but right now, China controls 98% of the world's gallium supply. If you've never heard of gallium, don't worry, that's the point. It's the critical material behind next generation semiconductors. And Beijing has been using it as leverage in a global tech war. But here's the twist. A tiny American company just developed breakthrough gallium nitride, or GaN technology, that could make China's grip irrelevant. Silicon chips, they've hit a wall. Even NVIDIA's CEO says Moore's law is dead. But GaN chips use up to 40% less energy charged 3 times faster, and can deliver dramatically higher performance than traditional silicon. And this small US firm, they hold 250 American patents on this technology. Now, major global brands, including NVIDIA, Samsung, Dell, Lenovo, and LG, are already partnering with them. This isn't about politics. It's about better technology winning. An investing expert just released an urgent presentation explaining why the next 12 months could be critical and how regular investors can discover the name of this under-the-radar company before the wider market catches on. Watch the full briefing now. Go to ganrevolution.com. That's ganrevolution.com. Don't miss it. Also, it's not just that you need to know about. If you take a drive through any major city after sunset, you'll notice something strange. Dark windows, empty offices. Right now, 1 in 5 commercial buildings in America is sitting vacant, and nearly $1 trillion in real estate loans are coming due just this year. If those buildings stay empty, the banks take the hit. And those are the same banks where your retirement savings likely sit right now. There's a new free report called the Ghost Tower Signal that breaks it all down. It uncovers 7 early warning signs that showed up before every major crash since 1929. All 7 are active again right now. This won't make the evening news, but it could help you protect your savings from what's coming. Download it for free at cloutgold.com, and that's cloutgold.com. Or call 855-803-GOLD to get your copy mailed to you. All right, you guys, you got it, 855-GOLD. Let me read that again. That's 855-803-GOLD or cloutgold.com and get that free copy. You've got to know what's heading your way. And American Alternative Assets educates us really, really well about how to protect our entire portfolio, however big or small it is, in this incredibly unstable environment. I love you guys. Please remember to support Outspoken on Substack or Daily Clout. And I will see you probably tomorrow.